Live from the Plutopia News Network, this is the Plutopia Happy Hour. Our guest this evening is Nate Wilcox. I'm Scoop Sweeney, and over there in South Austin, that's John Lebkowski. Hello, John.
Yes, indeed. Here I am, and here we all are. And here we are with Nate Wilcox, our pal Nate manages a bunch of like mixed martial art websites. And he hosts a rock and roll podcast called Let It Roll. But in a past life, he was a political consultant, which is a lot like the cage fighting thing, right?
Similar. The cage fighters are a lot more sensitive to what you say to them than politicians are. So.
That's for sure. Well, we're here to talk about politics, not cage fighting, though we could talk about both or either or whatever we want to.
I'm off the clock, so I prefer to not talk about cage fighting.
There you go. So. Well, that's fine, because we really did promise that we were going to talk about politics tonight. And particularly, I think when I approached you about this, Nate, I said that we could sort of talk about politics as performance.
Which definitely is.
Yeah.
It's not performance art, though. It's pretty artless, generally.
Yes. As a rule, it's artless and sometimes heartless.
I'm actually looking for a quote that I posted today, which Scoop heard earlier. It's from Marx, Groucho Marx. Politics is the art of looking for trouble, finding it everywhere, diagnosing it incorrectly, and applying the wrong remedies.
All hail Marx and Lenin.
There you go.
John Lennon, not that other guy.
How about the Firesign Theater album?
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So who wants to go first?
I mean, what angles are you looking to hit on it? I'm pretty dispirited politically at the moment myself. The Biden administration seems to be fizzling out, which is no surprise to anybody who's really paying attention to Biden's previous career and ignoring the newspaper reports that he was going to be the new FDR. You're not ever going to turn Joe Biden into FDR, not in a million years, and especially not at his age and in this political environment. So, yeah, it looks like there's not going to be. He threw in the towel on the infrastructure negotiations with the Republicans and with Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema there. If it's not bipartisan, it's not going to happen. So, it looks like we're a couple months into the Biden administration. We're throwing in the towel on legislation at a time when it's pretty desperately needed. And, we didn't get any significant, compared to other Western democracies, American citizens got virtually no COVID relief, and American businesses got enormous amounts of COVID relief, and they're doing things with the money like buying up private residences. Single family homes are being bought up by, equity investment groups. If you look at the house prices in Austin or anywhere else, it's even spilling out into smaller cities, places like Dayton, Ohio, that have hitherto been spared the real estate mania of the last 10 years. And it's just crazy. I mean,
you say that Biden is fizzling, but to me, it's like a bunch of Republican vandals are letting the air out of his tires, or maybe even slashing his tires, and it's kind of not from any want of trying. I mean, I'm sure he's willing to climb out of the car and change the tire, but if all four tires are flat, your spare's not going to do you much good.
Well, the thing about that is the Republicans don't have majorities anywhere. The people that are blocking the Biden agenda are Democrats, not Republicans. I mean, Republicans can be bad actors all they want, but that should be
arguable whether they're Democrats, though. I mean, when you get to Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema,
they're nominally Democrats at least, and that was the package we were sold. That Biden's going to have these majorities. We're going to do all these great things, and then they get here and suddenly their hands are tied because of the Senate parliamentarian, who's somebody that, Kamala Harris could have fired on day one. The Republicans fired the parliamentarian about 15 years ago, and nobody cared. Nobody would care if Kamala Harris fired the parliamentarian. But the Democrats like to play this game of, oh, we'd love to help, but our hands are tied.
You're saying the Democrats are really weak. really, is what I'm
It's
hearing.
on beyond weak. What I'm saying is that they are working for the people that pay for their campaigns, and that their job is to pretend to be trying to do something that then they don't do. And here we are. And next stop, the next Republican is going to be worse than Trump. If we let these guys get away with January 6th, that sends a real strong message that a coup is on the table. And that seems to be what we're doing. I mean, the fact that Biden's not even saying anything about it, what are Biden's public utterances anyway? It's like the guy crawls out from his hole periodically, says very little, and then goes back in, and I mean, this is kind of what we get for electing a guy who was at the presidential debates with his dentures falling out and his eyes turning into blood balls, and then Kamala's trip to Latin America this week was an utter fiasco. So yeah, I mean, to say I'm not optimistic is a pretty big understatement. I hope you're ready for
It sounds like you're saying we now have not just rhinos, but we have dinos as well, Democrats in name only. Of course, that's been the case for quite a while.
Oh yeah, I mean, somebody like Joe Manchin is definitely a dino, but the bigger thing is that I think Glenn Greenwald diagnosed it a long time ago as the villain of the week or whatever. I mean, anytime the Democrats have an opportunity to pass progressive legislation, suddenly there's a new obstacle, and everybody says, "Oh goodness, that Joe Manchin, we just can't get around him." And when it was the Obama's healthcare bill, it was, "Oh, that Joe Lieberman, we just can't get around him." And if it wasn't Manchin or Sinema, it would be somebody else. The Democrats would produce somebody. I mean, it is absolutely a fixed game. That was my conclusion after working for Democrats at middling high level for 10 years, was that they are not working for the voters. They are working for the donors. They are working for the big contributors, and they know exactly what they're doing.
Just like the Republicans are, right? I mean, there's no difference in the two parties there, huh?
I think there's enormous differences. The Republican donor base kind of lost control of the party when Trump got elected. That was not the big money pulling the strings on that. So there was kind of a hostile takeover of the Republican Party, which the groundwork for that was laid in 2010 with the Tea Party, which was funded by big donors like Koch, et cetera. And there is definitely big money behind Trump. And, I mean, there's a lot of companies that say they oppose things like the voter suppression law that almost passed in Texas. They actually then turn around and fund the Republicans that are voting for that stuff. But the Republican Party is a different situation, where they've morphed into this proto-fascist party that's way different from the Karl Rove G.W. Bush party of 15 years ago that was totally in service to the donors, and is now in service to Trump in this almost cult of personality way, and in this way where Trump's not even necessarily trying to accomplish anything beyond keeping his profile high and raising money in really egregious scams. I mean, they've gone over to the prayer cloth model of fundraising, like, Robert Tilton, the televangelist or something, where they're just literally scalping their donors just to get a quick buck. There's not any kind of long-term big business agenda there. There's no agenda at all other than short-term profiteering, and this voter suppression stuff is sort of a parallel track. There's a really good article in the Atlantic Monthly. I assume it's this month. I just read it yesterday, but it divides America into 4 factions. It calls them Free America, which is the old school Reagan, big business Republicans. And then there's what they call Real America, which is the Donald Trump, Sarah Palin kind of branch of the Republicans, the ugly American branch. And then there's Smart America, which is the Barack Obama, Clinton family, meritocratic establishment centrist Democrats. And then what they call the Just America, which is the younger, Black Lives Matter type Democrats. It's pretty interesting. There's a lot of different forces at play right now, some of which are pretty new. This what they call Real America. was allied and happy to follow along with the Republicans for a long time. But after the failure of the second Bush administration, it created this opportunity for somebody like Donald Trump to come along and seize the mantle of the leadership of that cadre. And there's really no voting support for the old school Mitt Romney business Republicans anymore. So they all have to kowtow to this craziness of Trump. And
so their party was hijacked.
I wouldn't say it was hijacked as much as it ran off the road and somebody else picked the car keys up and drove off with it. I mean, the fact that Bush was an utter disaster economically, an utter disaster internationally, and then they run McCain and Romney for 2 election cycles without breaking from Bush's policies, and then are shocked in 2016 when Trump just walked in and blew over the whole house of cards. I mean, do you remember the South Carolina debate when Trump came out and blamed G.W. Bush for 9/11 happening on his watch, and the crowd, which was stuffed with Jeb Bush's political insiders, gasps and, he can't, how can he say this? And every pundit gets on the air and is like, oh, that's it for Trump. If there's one thing Republicans love, it's that Bush family. He'll never recover from insulting G.W. Bush. Same thing happened when he insulted John McCain. And it's been shown time and time again, no Republican voter actually cares about that stuff. They do not believe in low taxes and small government. They are pissed and want somebody to, flip the bird at smart America, at the managerial class, the Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama went to college and we're smart and we're going to tell you what to do people. That's all they want, is this visceral screw you.
But Trump has supporters from within that class too.
Well, yeah, not very many of them. He has.
I keep running into people. I know this one guy who, he was a former Republican, I guess. I don't know that he is anymore. And he's got a lot of money and he's got all these friends, tons of people that he knows that are Republicans, and they're all Trumpists, and they're all like upper middle class management types who are Republicans.
There's a difference between the professional managerial class and people that are upper middle class or wealthy. Like Trump supporters tend to own car lots or sell boats. They're business people as a rule. They're not generally college educated manager types. They're not history professors. They're not scientists. They're, and that's why Trump and the Republicans lost, because the suburban upper middle class Republicans abandoned him in droves just because these are literate college educated people who just could not go there with Trump, especially after botching the COVID epidemic. If he had just put on a face mask that said Trump 2020, he would have won the election in a walk. If he had just said, hey, all you need to do is wear a mask, it's no big deal. Let's put on some masks,
about
people.
That? I mean, he, throughout his presidency, his popularity rating was low. Are you sure he would have won?
He came damn close. For somebody who killed 500,000 Americans by botching a pandemic to barely lose like this. And he was never that popular to begin with. I mean, remember, he barely won the first time. He didn't get any more voters than Romney did. He got fewer voters than Romney did. It's just that the Democrats ran Hillary Clinton, who's this historically despised political figure and legendarily incompetent campaigner. And again, she was the victim of a slander campaign from the right wing for 20 years. But then she does everything she can to help it with her terrible political instincts. So, the stuff is complicated. It's not either or. But the point I was trying to make was that the Republican Party, as evidenced by Trump's, the controlling dynamic of it, the Trump voters, they're not looking for policy solutions. I don't even know if they care about the voter suppression bills. They are just angry and want somebody to express their anger, and they're willing to go along with literally anything. I mean, Trump can change his position from day to day, and they'll follow along. I mean, that's sort of the definition of fascism, which is a political, and I don't even want to call it a philosophy, but an ideology that I never understood growing up. I was always like, I've read the Federalist Papers. I've read the Communist Manifesto. I've read Adam Smith. I've read a little bit of Karl Marx.
You can't grasp it intellectually, right? It's a gut thing.
Fascist, and I kept looking, what's the founding text of fascism? And it wasn't until, as Umberto Eco, the Italian writer, had a great article that summed it up. You can't put fascism in a book because it's strictly going for this emotional appeal of chest thumping and yelling loud and whatever feels good at the moment. It's not a coherent ideology, and that's why it never works. That's why, other than governments like Franco in Spain or Pinochet in Chile, where they're propped up by other powers, fascism has never worked on its own. I mean, Hitler ran Germany into the ground in a remarkably short period of time. I mean, people talk about, oh, Hitler, what a great leader. He really made the trains run on time. No, 8 years into or 12 years into his tenure, the Russians are overrun Berlin. I mean, he reduced the greatest city in Germany to rubble.
So you're saying this is a cycle and it's going to cycle out. I mean, Trump is ultimately going to fail. Now, people are saying that he's going to be reinstated in August.
I mean, which shows you the exact kind of batshit dipshittery that his followers are willing to entertain and repeat. And I don't know. It's hard for me to see Trump even being healthy enough to run for re-election. He's under investigation in so many places. I would have to think that one of those investigations is going to catch something, because there's no end of evidence. But at the same time, Merrick Garland's Department of Justice is defending Trump on point after point. He's carrying.
Are they really defending Trump? I mean, this came up the other day where they were talking about the defense of the remarks he made about that woman, the defamation thing, but it didn't sound to me like they were defending Trump. It sounded to me like they were defending the office of the presidency, that they were just trying to.
I mean, that's a distinction without a difference. You're repeating their justification for what they're doing, but.
Well, why else would they do it? I mean, why would Merrick Garland want to defend Trump?
There's a reflexive habit. It's the same reason why Rahm Emanuel made sure Tom DeLay was not prosecuted. I mean, they moved mountains to end the investigations against Tom DeLay, because Rahm Emanuel, and he said this to me personally, did not believe in Congress people being investigated for crimes. That was his foundational belief, is that we shouldn't be investigating Congress members for crimes. That's where these people are coming from. Elite impunity is absolutely a core belief of many people in power. So, I can't speculate to what Merrick Garland's motivations are, but remember, Merrick Garland was a centrist Republican. He was picked by Obama to be a Supreme Court nominee because he thought he could make the case that, hey, we're nominating a Republican. Aren't you guys happy? And Biden picked him to be his attorney general based on, remember this guy, as if he was some kind of progressive champion, when the guy's a fucking Republican. I mean, and look at what he's doing. And this look forward, not back mentality that Obama took with the Bush administration, Biden's doing the same stuff with the Trump administration, even though the crimes were, I don't know if anything Trump did was as egregious as the war crimes that Bush and Cheney committed, but nonetheless, they were easier to prove, I think. And,
well, those guys were like a war machine kind of operation, and Trump was more like a clown show kind of operation. It was more like
a short con. They were long con artists, and he was a short con artist.
Yeah, and he's basically just a cheap crook, as opposed to those guys who were like expensive crooks.
Exactly. Excuse me. And
hey, I got to ask you, why is Glenn Greenwald sucking up to fascists now? Why has he become a right-wing pundit?
I wouldn't fall for that line. I mean, watch what he's saying and listen to what he's doing. I think that he has overlooked a lot of things the right wing has done. But remember, he was right about Russiagate. Russiagate was a puffed up collection of bullshit and nonsense that did not bring down the Trump administration, that did not hold up. The Steele dossier was paid for by the Clinton campaign, and that was concealed.
I don't agree with you. I think that there was substance to Russiagate, and that they just swept it under the fucking rug.
I mean, Mueller was supposed to prosecute it. Nobody got prosecuted. No indictments came out.
They didn't let him do it. I mean,
Mueller's the one who didn't do it. I mean, the Steele dossier.
I don't think he could have done it.
That didn't hold up.
I don't think they let him do it.
Who's they?
Rosenstein, Trump, the whole
Mueller,
Department
Mueller
of Justice,
his case, and the stuff just wasn't there. Now, I'm not saying that Trump
Did
didn't
you
play
read that
shenanigans.
report? Did you look at that?
I've scanned that
I
report
mean,
at
there's
length.
absolutely no doubt that there was collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians.
No, there's extensive proof that there was obstruction of justice on Trump's part. But things like Michael Flynn, who's a complete asshole and lunatic, but the thing that Michael Flynn was indicted for is perfectly normal. It's normal for an incoming national security administrator to be speaking to the heads of other governments. And the fact that he was spied on and ratted out and bullied into
Well, why did he lie about
a guilty plea, I have no idea. I cannot explain what this nut job's motivation was, but why are they making such a deal out of the incoming NSA chief speaking to the Russian ambassador to help Israel, which is what he was up to? I mean, Israel is a government that manifestly has a much bigger influence on what goes on in Washington than Russia does. I mean, yeah, did Russia buy some Facebook ads? Yes. Were those Russians government agents or were they just scumbags? That I don't know. Did it impact the election results? No, that is not.
I
what
mean, you got to
decided the
think about
election.
so we were all raised to believe that Russia was sort of like a sinister, dark, tyrannical state with quite a bit of power, and they had nuclear bombs and all that stuff. But today, it's basically today Russia is a racket. Basically, it's run by, a kind of mafia operation. And that's kind of what we had with Trump too. I think that that's Trump's real affinity with Putin, is that they're both gangsters, basically. They're both
strong
crooks.
men who bluster around and
except
and
Trump's a really weak, strong man.
Yeah, I mean, Putin is a much more serious actor than Trump is, but Putin is not the reason Hillary Clinton lost the election. Hillary Clinton lost the election because she was a historically shitty candidate.
Well, yeah, I mean, she lost the election for herself.
And that's the deal.
There.
Like our communications, you're talking about a multi-billion-dollar communications effort in the 2016 election. And at most, the Russians spent a few $1,000s, and we're not even sure that was government money. The Facebook ads and all that stuff, there's no there.
Yeah, but my Russiagate concern, okay, personally, the way I was looking at it, I didn't even buy that they influenced the election that much. I mean, you could watch what was going on and you could know that wasn't the case. But my bigger concern was that they were a bunch of crooks, that they were in, to use that word, collusion with Trump over gangster kind of things, crooked kind of things, that like he was doing money laundering for them and that kind of stuff. And that basically what we were seeing was a global criminal operation plant itself in the White House what could go wrong if that happens, right?
And that global criminal operation was called the Trump Organization. Right, we elected the criminal. There were lots of
you elected him.
We as the people of America elected Donald Trump president, and he was a criminal. His organization.
Actually, we kind of didn't. I mean, the Electoral College, we could get into that, but he certainly didn't win by a majority.
No, but that's the way the game is played. G.W. Bush didn't win by a majority either, and the Supreme Court didn't have to come in and elect and select Trump the way the Supreme Court did in 2000 with Bush. But my point is, you want to talk about crooks? Look at Sheldon Adelson, a gambling magnate who made all his money in China, who has these deep, deep relationships with the Chinese government and deep, deep relationships with the Israeli government, who are in cahoots with the Saudi government, who is as corrupt as the day is long. I mean,
may he rest in peace.
Yeah, pieces. Between Putin and MSB, I'll take Putin. I mean, Putin at least can get a job from point A to point B. MSB fails at every single thing he touches. The guy is a walking disaster, murderous idiot, fail son, of a decrepit, pathetic dynasty that we've propped up from day one. And the fact that there was all this attention on Russia when China, Saudi Arabia, and Israel manifestly put way more money into the election, have way more influence over our government. So, I mean, like,
So why were they paying so much attention to Russia? That was kind of a media construct as much as anything.
That's MSNBC. That is MSNBC all the way. Why did MSNBC hire so many ex-CIA, NSA, and FBI officials to talk on the air? I mean, why does Hollywood write movies to the way the CIA wants them written? I mean, there is a class of people in this country who make big money working for the military industrial complex, and Trump made the deep state not a thing because he misused the term, but there really is a deep state. I mean, the presidents come and go and the bureaucrats stay in place, and generally the bureaucracies continue their momentum. I mean, you never see the defense budgets take serious hits. You know, if
the deep state, it's just that the deep state is not necessarily inherently sinister. It's just that
it's just a
obviously you have a bunch. When you pass laws, the laws have to be implemented in some way. And we do that through various agencies that then create regulations, and that's the deep state.
And also bureaucracies that go beyond laws and regulation and take their own actions. And anybody who knows anything about the history of the CIA, I mean, or the FBI, I mean, things like COINTELPRO, the murder of Fred Hampton, just all the shit they pulled in the 60s and 70s, Iran-Contra in the 80s, the Iraq War in the 90s and the 2000s, no end of heinous actions. I mean, John Brennan lied to Congress about spying on the American people. And the only reason we know that is because of Snowden, and yet Brennan and all these people are on MSNBC day in, day out, spinning and talking their stuff. And they never point out, well, this guy's on the board of this and that different defense contractor. And, I mean, like anybody watching cable news for any reason, just poke out your eyes. It will be faster. I mean, like Fox is patently, obviously horrible and full of misinformation, but MSNBC is also terrible. And I mean, these are entities, if you get all your information from them, you will not be able to tie your shoes and put your car keys in the ignition slot. This is, just utter garbage and nonsense. And so like, I don't really care who Glenn Greenwald's friends are. Like, I mean, Greenwald is still an excellent journalist. Greenwald did more to debunk the Bolsonaro administration in Brazil than any other reporter, than every other reporter combined. I mean, he exposed how the United States helped bring down the left-wing governments of Brazil. I know we're talking about Obama.
Well, we knew that. I mean,
did we? I mean, Greenwald.
It's been going on for a long time. I mean, the United States has always done that kind of shit. Yeah,
and we continue to do it. And falling into this kind of team red, team blue. I'm on team MSNBC. My crazy uncle's on team red, team Fox. He's bad. I mean, you're both idiots.
No, this all reminded me why I was apolitical for years. I mean, I started feeling political again because of Bush and the the Iraq War and all that, and then even more so with Trump. And just recently, it's like, how did I get sucked into all of this bullshit? It's just bullshit. And there's not a lot you and I can do about it. We can vote, but our votes don't even mean that much.
No. And
Scoop looks like he's suffering from PTSD over there. Do you want to get a word in, Scoop?
I was hoping to.
Have at it.
Go for it.
You're dwelling a lot on the national political scene, but the more important scene is local and state. And
absolutely,
that's where people are really being raped and where some really bad things are happening. I could care less what they're doing in Washington because it's the same game that's been going on for decades. Do you really think that the mega donors for the Republican Party are thrilled with the fact that they have lost a lot of that power that they had for so long? So, they're going to be playing, some sort of game to try and regain the Republican Party if there's anything left of it. But
and just look at the voter suppression.
In Texas, terrible things are being done. And if you listen to cable news, they'll occasionally report on it. But, we have a governor who is, wanting to jail anybody that comes across the border, promising to keep them in jail for 6 months to a year, which is insane even to the law enforcement people that want to do something about the border. So why don't we concentrate more our political efforts on the local scene, because that's where people are really losing a lot of key battles, especially in our area.
I mean, look at the local news. There isn't one. When I had my first serious political experience was in 1990 when Ann Richards beat Clayton Williams for the governor race. And I can remember when Ann Richards debated Jim Maddox, the state attorney general, in the Democratic primary. And coming out of that room, there was a bank of cameras. There were cameras from Dallas, there were cameras from Austin, cameras from Houston, cameras from San Antonio, cameras from Fort Worth. There were print reporters, a dozen of them. I mean, it was a big deal. By 2002, there were half that many reporters. And by 2012, 2014, there was one. There was the Texas Tribune, and that was it. And as much as I love the Texas Tribune, I mean, it's funded by lobbyists. It's far from ideal. And it's certainly no replacement for a robust urban news structure. And part of that was the phenomenon of mono news stories. Like after the Gulf War and after O.J. Simpson, the big money realized, wow, if we just pick one hot story and focus on it all the time, everybody will pay attention to that, ignore everything else. That had been building up since Watergate. But that combined with some pretty complex economics that killed local newspapers. I mean, people like our friendly acquaintance Craig Newmark, with Craigslist, local newspapers used to be a business you could not fail to make money at. I mean, Warren Buffett loved that business because, look, it's a local monopoly. You can put your dumbest brother-in-law in charge of it, and he will make money hand over fist. After Craigslist killed the classified ad business, and the rest of the internet killed local advertising, you can't make money with a local newspaper anymore. There's no local newspaper that has significant investigative resources. People watch national news instead of local news, and consequently have no clue as to what's going on in their own cities and states. And the powers that be like it like that. And it also, it impacts campaigns. Like, Beto O'Rourke's campaign in 2018 was really impressive. I mean, he really did way more than anybody thought a Democratic candidate could do. But he lost because Ted Cruz got these insane vote margins in red counties, like 85-15, like 90-10. In the kind of results that we would have laughed at coming out of an election in communist Albania in the 80s. But having relatives up there, I'm like, that's entirely possible. Like the places are so partisan. And Beto tried. He really worked hard to campaign all over the state. He was in Amarillo like 15 times. He went to Abilene over a dozen times. The problem was the only people who knew he went to Abilene were the people that were there, the 24 people that actually showed up, because there's no local news in Abilene. They didn't, and if they did send a camera crew, it was just one of the three, stations, if that. So nobody even knew he was there, much less heard his message. And by the time they hear about him, they're seeing him on Ellen. And they're going, who's this freak from the big city on Ellen? I'm not voting for him, and their church is telling them, oh, this guy's terrible. And Ted, we love Ted Cruz, et cetera, et cetera. And it just becomes this core identity value of who are you? Well, I'm a Republican because I'm from, Borger, Texas. And this is what everybody from Borger, Texas is, who's not, the very small percentage of people that are Black. And some of the Black people are for the Republicans too. It's a pretty hopeless situation.
Well, so we voted for the Canadian Texan instead of the El Paso Texan.
Yeah, the real problem with the media is that there's very little ownership outside of just a very small number of, mega corporations. When I started working in news, in the late 60s, there were lots and lots of companies owning a radio station here, a TV station there, but deregulation allowed these guys to amass huge fleets of stations, buying up the local stations, and they're all being programmed from a central point. So that's why there's no local news in Texas, because there are no local news people. They're all getting it fed in from the mothership hovering somewhere.
Yeah, the 96 Communications Act was just terrible for that. I mean, that immediately killed music radio, because Clear Channel comes out of nowhere and has dozens and hundreds of stations. And you get things like Sinclair, the company that owns so many local news networks, and it's just spewing straight propaganda the whole way. And there's no way to be a Dan Rather again, or an Edward R. Murrow, that somebody that covers local news and breaks a story on a scandal and then builds their way up, the ladder, and climbs the ladder nationally. That doesn't exist anymore. The skill set of critical thinking and willingness to tell truth to power, that is not wanted in the media business now. And now you're even seeing institutions like the New York Times having a very difficult time competing for reporting talent with Substack. And it's a bad situation. I do not see it ending well at all.
You don't think Substack could be our salvation?
Yeah.
It's Greenwald's salvation, but I don't think it's going to help us much.
The news in Austin is pretty much non-existent, especially on a weekend. Have you ever tried to find out, local news, if there's, sports and golf games on TV, but you won't find news even at the normal, 5 or 6 p.m. slot on the weekends. Austin is left and gone home.
Yeah, it's very disconcerting, and fundamentally, I think it's a function of not having monopoly laws. The antitrust laws are not enforced. We have fewer and fewer players with more and more control, and nobody in the history of the world has ever seen anything like the power of Google, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, and Microsoft to surveil us, to monitor what we say, and then control what we can see. I mean, Google can, and their algorithms, and Facebook can choose exactly which stories they want to let people see and what outlets, what information gets seen. And, Alex Jones is not the problem. We've always had crazy people saying stupid shit on street corners or passing out pamphlets on the street corner. The problem is the YouTube algorithm recommending Alex Jones crazy videos like 15 billion times. And their goal is just to get people watching YouTube for hours and hours. And they've discovered that if you get people angry, they'll keep watching videos and keep sucking up ads. And they don't have any conception of what kind of powers they're messing with. I hope not, anyway. I mean, if you look at like WhatsApp and its role in not just the recent clashes in Israel, where it's this amazing tool for organizing a race riot and a lynching party, and both Palestinian and Israeli groups were doing that in Israel, not just the occupied territories, but in Israel proper. Israeli citizens were fighting each other based on ethnic groups and organizing this all on WhatsApp. Pogroms in Indonesia and Malaysia have been organized. What's going on in Myanmar has been aided and abetted by WhatsApp enormously. It's just staggering. The solution is pretty simple: is break up these monopolies. Facebook should not own WhatsApp. Facebook should not own Instagram. The fact that these entities can control with their algorithms which stories get seen by people, but then claim that, I'm just a platform. We're not actually publishing news because, the news stories are written and posted by other people. Well, the fact that they're controlling which news stories are seen by people.
Yeah, that's editorial function.
Yeah. And they should not have the protection. They should be exposed to lawsuits. But look how long it's taken to sue Alex Jones over this egregious blood libel of people whose children were murdered. I mean, this is something that should have been shut down pretty quickly, and it's gone on for over a decade. And Alex Jones is anything but a major player. Somebody like Facebook just has absolute impunity to wreck lives by the hundreds of thousands. And, it's already been disastrous. The fact that COVID killed more people than more Americans than World War II is still hard to get your head around. And the misinformation and disinformation and lack and erosion of public trust because of these media monopolies is a big factor in that. And then on the other hand, you've got the rot within the CDC. I mean, Trump didn't make the CDC put out faulty testing tools. That was a bureaucratic failure within the organization. This refusal to recognize that COVID could be airborne. I mean, that's some weird fight that's been going on in the medical field for decades, almost a century. And, almost became sort of a religious belief on the part of a lot of medical professionals, like, oh, we know the miasma theory is wrong. So that time and time again, they've had to prove, oh, well, respiratory diseases can be carried by aerosols. You can get these diseases through ventilation systems in hospitals. And it wasn't until it became painfully obvious that COVID was being distributed that way. And yet you go to your kids' school and they're still doing the security theater with checking people's temperatures and wiping down tables. And they're not worried at all about the ventilation systems in the school, which is actually how the virus is getting distributed.
Is that really true, though? I thought that school systems really were concerned about their ventilation systems, and
some have been, but the
restaurants,
the actual check, the things that they do to check my kid into school or check their temperature. The things they talked about was we're wiping the tables at the cafeteria every day, which none of that does jack to slow down COVID,
But the cost of doing an upgrade to the ventilation system, the air systems in a place like that is pretty high. And the money that's being put into education is pretty bad, especially in places like Texas. I mean, the underfunding of education is, in my opinion, a criminal act.
Yeah, and a deliberate one. But I mean, look at the way we did everything with COVID. It was not, I mean, if you look at the countries that had the best outcomes, they focused on squelching the disease transmission first. And that gave them the best economic outcomes. Like they took hard measures, clamped down on travel. They had quarantines. They really monitored travelers coming from places with COVID. I'm talking about Australia, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Vietnam, and other places. I mean, they went for zero COVID. And that was how you beat COVID, was no COVID. We're not going to have COVID here. We are going to snuff this out, because if you let it just kind of fester on the margins, eventually you get with what's happening in India. And now we're looking at a situation where the virus is mutated and there's so many countries where it's just spreading rampantly, and so many places in the US. Like, this is, it's crazy. Like look at who's not being vaccinated, and it's becoming this partisan belief. It's like this giant science experiment to see who can kill themselves. It's just, I don't know, man. It's crazy days.
Well, do you think we actually have won the war against the
virus? No.
The virus, because the rest of the world hasn't come anywhere, or not the rest of the world, but much of the world hasn't come anywhere near vaccination levels that even we have.
No, and we don't have herd immunity, and won't with the levels of resistance to getting vaccinated that we're seeing. And it's just a matter of time before we get variants that are going to break through the vaccination. And it's almost enough to make you think that somebody in charge is actually worried about that we've exceeded the carrying capacity of the planet, and they're calling the herd on purpose, because it's hard to come up with another explanation of what is it they think they're doing with this.
Yeah, they're just stupid.
Stupid and greedy and short-sighted and so cruel.
Look at this. That clearly something has happened here. There's been a real persistent downward trend. Now, it looks like it's leveling up a little bit here.
Yeah.
Throughout the U.S., there's been a real plummeting of the instances of these cases. And it's sort of like in Austin. In Austin, we have just a tiny fractional bit of the population that are sick. And with that going on, it's hard for people not to start to think, oh, wow, it's finally over. We're going to be okay.
I mean,
but it could surge again.
Yeah, easily. And if you're vaccinated, it's easy to be like, well, I'm not too worried about it because I'm vaccinated. And that's
But you can still get
seemingly a
sick if you're
safe bet.
vaccinated. Yeah.
Yeah, you can still get sick if you're vaccinated, but you're much, 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 much less likely to get seriously ill. But the problem is these variants that are being bred and evolving in places like India and Brazil and Abilene are eventually going to break through the vaccinations. And I think people like Pfizer are just looking great. We'll make a new booster and we'll charge people money for the next round. You know, I mean, like that chart you just showed us, we're at a level of COVID in the United States that's multiples of the level of COVID it was last March when we shut down the whole country over it. And we've got 10 times as many COVID cases now as we did then. And we don't even care. Look at the graph again. Go back to pull that thing up again. I mean,
March, it shows that
March 2020,
13th
not 2021. March 2020. I'm talking when they first shut down America over COVID in 2020. Pull the chart up on the screen.
I don't recall getting. I mean, obviously we didn't have that many cases in March. It started going up here. I don't recall.
Pull the chart up again. The chart you just had. We had a real shutdown.
Sorry,
that's
I'm
when
looking at it, but I'm not showing it.
Yeah. I mean, that's when the real shutdown was.
Okay, March of 2020.
Look back there. March, it's flatlined. Look where we are at June. We've got more cases right now than we did at the end of March back there. Though. Look, draw that line from where you're at all the way over to March. See your mouse right now at June 2021? Go across to March 2020.
Well,
your mouse is way higher than.
Well, wait a minute. That's really inaccurate what you're saying, because they were really not capturing the data then. It wasn't that the cases didn't exist; they just weren't capturing the data.
And do we know that we're capturing the data now?
Supposedly we are. Supposedly we're in a lot better shape with that.
I mean, I would assume that we're much better, but nonetheless,
there's probably a lot more cases.
My point is that Earth 2020 would be completely shitting their pants, freaked out about the levels of COVID that we're just taking as, oh yeah, that's just the level of COVID that floats around, you know? I mean, like, we just don't even care anymore.
Well, you know, now that they have this miracle vaccine, people are relaxing and trying to get back to whatever they had before. But as long as the world is still infected, you know, it's not going to be, easy for us to go back to normal because the world's going to start developing, like you say, more variants, and it's going to start coming back here. So until everybody is being taken care of, there's not going to be a cure.
Well, if you look at that graph again, here's another point about that. So the whole point about, like, back here when things were relatively low, we like shutting down, telling people to stay home and all that was supposed to, we were trying to contain the virus. And, you know, we sort of did fairly well until people just started being stupid, you know.
Well,
and
also
when it started really boosting.
But that was a predicted surge because of the weather. I mean, a lot of these viral things come and go with weather, and the South, the thing seems to surge in summer because that's when people are indoors with air conditioning. And I was reading in the New York Times just the other day, they're concerned that low levels of vaccinations in the South are going to set us up for yet another surge this year in the States, not even in India or Brazil. But
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if there's another surge by a confluence of things, though. I think that, you know, the fact that so many people have been vaccinated may mitigate it, but vaccination is really only at about 50%. So and a lot of kids haven't been vaccinated.
Exactly,
and they'll be carrying it around, you know.
And also, we're seeing these new strains in Brazil and India that are affecting children in much more serious ways. It's just a matter of time before the virus evolves to hit kids hard. You know, the fact that it doesn't hit kids is still a weird thing we don't quite understand. And, you know, and it's not just Republicans that aren't getting vaccinated. If you look at the stats, it's a lot of working class Democrats, especially African Americans and Hispanics, who just don't trust the medical system. because they just don't believe, oh, the shot's free. Really? Yeah, I've heard that before. Like they are so trained to, their experience of the American medical system is, if you go in for any kind of treatment, prepare for a scary surprise bill. Like, it's a guarantee. It's coming for you, so you can tell people that the shots are free till they're blue in the face, but their lived experience is, every time I go to the emergency room, every time I go to the doctor, I get hit with a bill that's much bigger than what I got before. So it's, a lot of the people that aren't getting vaccinated, it's not because they're afraid of the vaccine, it's because they're afraid of the bill, and what do you do with that? And then you get Biden, refusing to pass any kind of healthcare legislation, insisting that Obamacare is a good thing.
He's refusing
to. We're so proud we're expanding it even more.
Is he refusing to do that?
Yeah, he's.
Has there been a call for him to do that?
A call to expand Medicaid. I mean, that was Bernie Sanders' whole platform. At one point, Biden was talking about how he was gonna be doing these progressive things, and the other day puts out a video with Obama that was like a Tango and Cash video where they're high-fiving over what a great success the ACA was, when it was this epic screw job that benefited the insurance companies and nobody else. And it's just, I don't know. I don't know what to do.
It was the only thing they could get.
No, they could have.
It was.
No.
How are you going to pass? How are you going to pass anything? I mean, considering how
Obama had a majority
that sausage
of the Senate,
factory was at the time. I'm not
going to argue that. Like, Rahm Emanuel was
a bad
actor.
Pass?
Well, for one thing, he could have not hired Rahm Emanuel as his chief of staff. Rahm Emanuel started the process by going to the pharmaceutical companies and saying, "Hey, write the bill you want." And the whole goal, this is documented stuff. If you read the histories of the Obama administration, the people that wrote those bills were coming from a lobbying standpoint. The whole bill is based on Mitt Romney's legislation in Massachusetts. They didn't have to start with that point. They could have started with expanding Medicare, for one thing.
Public option.
And for another thing, they should have been focused on the economy at that point anyway. The fact that they were doing healthcare legislation in the teeth of the biggest recession in U.S. history at that point was crazy pants to begin with. I mean,
why they didn't want to create Medicare for all, and why they still don't want to do it is because the way that Medicare works is that it sets prices, and it sets prices way lower than the pharma and medical complexes want to set.
Yeah.
I mean, so what happens is that, in fact, people who are not on Medicare are people, they're being charged a lot more. They may not be
subsidizing Medicare. It's the screw job.
It's all kind of a mess, really. It's kind of a
giant
mess.
crufty hairball.
Yeah.
And it's fundamentally corruption. I mean, once the campaign laws were set in the 70s that said money was free speech, just track it. I mean, look at somebody like Sam Rayburn, who went home after having been one of the most successful and storied speakers of the House in U.S. history. He went home to a middle-class house, and nobody does that anymore. Everybody comes out of Congress as a millionaire.
Come out rich, yeah.
And I mean, they're bought and paid for. Like, look at what's happening in the Texas legislature this time. The big scandal, the big crisis going into the Texas session this time was the failure of ERCOT during the winter storm Uri. And from the people that I know that were working up there as staffers and lobbyists, they were saying, look, nobody up here has any idea how to write legislation that complicated. They haven't touched it in 20 years when they wrote all the stuff deregulating it. And that stuff wasn't written by the legislature. I worked for the company that wrote that shit. That was written by the lobbyists and the electric companies. The expertise that you had in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, even in the 90s, you still had, Bob Bullock had teams of staffers who could have written complicated legislation like this, who'd spent their whole career studying this stuff. And, it's a big Jenga puzzle. And they knew, oh, well, you can't pull this one out, but you could pull that one out. Or if you pull this one out, this whole pile of crap falls. Let's pull that one. They don't have anybody up there who's capable of doing anything other than rubber stamping legislation that's spoon-fed to them by the lobby. And there's no lobby that wants to give us a fair and equitable functioning electrical system.
So
Period.
Nate, in the 5 minutes that we have left, will you explain how we're going to fix all this?
We're going to die. That's the happy ending.
Is it unfixable? I mean, has it ever been fixed? Has it ever worked?
Things have worked. I mean, this country functioned at a much higher level, but I mean, fundamentally, we won the lottery after World War II. I mean, after World War II, there was a period when we had 3% of the world population and something like 38% of the world's product, GDP. Our grandparents won the fucking lottery, and we've been living like the Beverly Hillbillies and thinking this is our birthright and this is just how things are going to be forever. You know, meanwhile, adding layer upon layer upon layer upon layer of corruption and complexity. And the only way that systems like that get fixed is to collapse. I mean, you know, we had opportunities to reform this in a sane manner, and we blew it, and we didn't do it. And I don't think we have the capacity to solve this problem. I mean, we are going to be facing serious declines in living standards, serious die. I mean, we just had over 500,000 Americans die of a preventable pandemic.
I just wonder how screwed up things are going to have to get before people are like, you know,
I mean,
in the streets.
Well, what the people want to know is Matthew McConaughey going to be our next governor or senator?
He certainly polls better than Abbott. I mean, you know, but does he stand for anything? Does he know what he's doing? Does he want to be governor? Like
Well, he does seem to want to be governor. I mean, people
He's
are saying that
making
he
noises
seems to be
that
serious about it.
yeah. I mean, it's very difficult, but
I mean, if he runs, he'll run because he really wants to be governor. But the question about whether he doesn't know anything about politics as far as I know.
Yeah. Does he have any concept of what he's in for, you know, and how hard they're going to come at him and how complicated it is, how big the state is, you know, but
we don't even know whether he would run as a Republican or a Democrat at this point.
No idea. Yeah. I mean, and the fact that the Democrats in Texas have nobody that's a viable candidate, you know, like Beto did amazing things in 2018 and then immediately pissed it all away trying to run for president. And I think permanently damaged himself in Texas since he couldn't go to the left of Sanders on economics because he's a plutocrat. He tried to go to the left of Sanders on guns and church and said some stuff that I think is going to prevent him from ever being elected in Texas, saying you're going to tax churches that want do gay marriage, you know, and the stuff he said about guns, you're done, you know.
Yeah, that was kind of a screwed up thing there. Well, you know, Plutopia, being Plutopia, we like plutocrats. Plutopian plutocrats.
Yeah, but so anyway, I hope you liked me ranting.
No, I think it's great. So I wonder, when are we going to see independents running for office and winning?
I don't know. I mean, anything can happen.
Yeah.
I cannot predict the future. I mean, you know, both parties are rotten to the core. The Democrats are completely hapless in Texas. So McConaughey could easily run as an independent.
I don't know if you noticed, but this image that I used in the blurb for this week, the flag is flying at half-mast.
Yeah,
that's kind of the way I feel about things.
Yeah.
Something has died.
A lot of things have died.
Yeah.
A lot of friends have died, you know.
Well, I guess we have reached the end of the internet, as we say.
Well, it was fun.
This was a blast, and I'm glad that you were not too reticent.
We hope to have you back. Maybe you could organize a cage match for us. Get some politicians in the old cage.
Yeah. Oh, we'd love to cover that.
That might be fun.
All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me.
Okay, we will see you soon.
All right, thanks, guys.
Okay, off we
Later.
go. Bye-bye.